We've got another fantastic speaker and I'd like to introduce her. So, the next speaker is pretty extraordinary, as was our speaker this morning. Now, when you have a mission set in your heart, then you have to be bold, you have to be brave, you focus on the outcome, and no matter what comes in your way, you carry on and you keep focusing. And you have to sometimes really step out of your comfort zone, and that is what our next speaker has really done. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Ro earlier this year, and she has shared with me many things, many stories that were very, very difficult to hear. And those are the stories of everyday New Zealanders that she hears all the time, and why she is championing for her cause. Now, Ro Edge is the co-founder and spokeswoman for Save Women's Sport Australia. Australasia? Australia, right. Yes, let's give her a hand already. Now, I'm not going to go into some of the amazing things that she has done. She is an example of never giving up, and she will share with you a recent announcement, which is something she's been really championing for. And, as I said yesterday, New Zealand First, we will listen to everyone. And Ro is one of these people who is out there championing for people, and we listen to Ro, and it means we're listening to everyone. So, ladies and gentlemen, nice hand for Ro Edge. Amazing woman.
Thanks, Tanya. I have to say, if you told me 5 years ago when I embarked on this fight that I would still be fighting for basic fairness for females in sport 5 years later, I might have rethought it, but luckily I'm quite stubborn. I believe we're actually living through a cultural moment that future humans are going to say, how the actual hell did we ever think that this was okay? And we'll have archives demonstrating how many people not merely failed to notice or speak up, but went out of their way to justify and encourage it. But I'm pretty confident no one in this room will be on that list, am I right? Yes. Good, because right now you seem to be the only political party who has the courage to stand up for reality over ideology by ensuring common sense things like fairness for females in sport, not indoctrinating children with gender ideology at school, and females once again having access to female-only bathrooms. But we need to ask, how did we reach the point where such common sense policies are even needed? How has a minority of a minority pushing a linguistic movement which has no basis in reality had the power to do what they've done, and then they make us out to be the controversial ones? Up until about 7 or 8 years ago, I think everyone would have agreed there was two sexes, right? It was a fact about nature. But we did understand that there was a very small number of people, predominantly men, who aren't happy with the sex that they are, and we needed to make some accommodations for them. But those men were mostly incredibly respectful to women and our feelings about their entry into our spaces. And that is still what I think a lot of people think we're talking about here, but we're not. Trans ideology is a recently emerged belief system that is based on nothing but twisted words and meanings, with doctrines that people feel pressured to adhere to, and it has permeated our institutions to an extraordinary degree. It's everywhere from primary school through to university, to government departments, through to corporations. People are feeling pressured to use preferred pronouns. Old gender stereotypes are bizarrely not only being reinforced again, but young people are being medicalised and sterilised to conform to them. And females are being gaslit to ignore their boundaries being crossed by males. It seems anyone who believes in biological reality needs to be demonised. Even a lesbian group called Lava will refuse to stand at Wellington Pride because they believe in same-sex attraction. They're lesbians, right? But this misogynistic belief system is also incredibly homophobic. Yet trans ideology is supported by our mainstream culture, our media, politicians, luckily not New Zealand First, and especially those on the left. And unfortunately, those who don't agree with it remain silent, due mainly, I think, to a fear of speaking up against it. But that's what I love about New Zealand First. You don't. And I've just realised I've forgotten to move my slides. There we go. On to the next one. Yeah, because when we remain silent, we don't just lose our freedom of belief and our freedom of speech, we lose the right to single-sex spaces that were set up for very biological reasons, and we lose our ability to argue for them. There is no sense in which a trans woman is actually a woman, right, except linguistically, because no matter how many drugs you take, oh, this is glitchy, how many drugs you take or how many surgeries you have, males are still males, humans cannot change sex. We are not clownfish. Look, people, oh, I've gone too far. People can identify and dress as they wish, but the problem comes when they force their beliefs on everybody else, and it impacts others' human rights, as trans ideology does to women's human rights. I was in Auckland last March when Kelly J. Keane-Minsell, also known as Posey Parker, gosh, we're having technology issues here, aren't we? Here we go. Came to hold an event called Let Women Speak. You only need to watch this footage to see how women are silenced by this misogynistic movement. The thing is, they can't let us speak because they know that the valid concerns we would raise would be shared by far the majority of the public, while their ideology is just illogical. It is why it was introduced by stealth into nearly every aspect of government without the public being aware, and it was supercharged during the Ardern regime. And it's why there is an attempt to cancel events held to try and raise awareness of the harms of this ideology. It's how we ended up with an event held simply to let women speak about their concerns, about the impacts this linguistic movement has on our rights and on our kids, when New Zealand men felt entitled to intimidate, assault and bash women, and our New Zealand police stood back and let it happen. Worse still, media and Labour and Green politicians were responsible for whipping up the hate against women, assisting trans activist Chanel Lau in his campaign to silence anyone who challenges the ideology. It still baffles me Chanel Lau was made Young New Zealander of the Year after this. That woke mind virus has infected so many. Anyway, now he's employed directly by the New Zealand Labour Party. The one good thing that came out of this event, though, is it opened up so many Kiwis' eyes to the lies being told by our media, thanks to footage like this captured by citizen photojournalist Simon Anderson, which was shared widely online. Does this look like a kind, inclusive celebration of trans rights the media told us it was? Yeah, nah. While I removed the sound on this video, I can tell you it was loud, so much so that my ears rung, at least for a week after. And I met one of our first supporters of Save Women's Sport here yesterday, and she said that she was deaf for a week after. The thing is, the more that Kiwis see and understand the impacts of this new belief system, the less they like it. And they are seeing it more and more, whether it's males and female sport or using female changing facilities, even when there are unisex ones available, or kids coming home from school all of a sudden confused about their gender. So unlike other social issues such as gay marriage and euthanasia, where support grew over time, quite the opposite has happened here. When we began polling on this issue in 2022, 27% of Kiwis thought it was acceptable, with 55% opposed. Since then, opposition to males participating in female sport has continued to increase. And polling just in the last few weeks now, 72% of Kiwis are opposed and 13% in support. And this isn't a left versus right issue, it's a right versus wrong issue. And the majority of Kiwis know it's wrong, especially the majority of New Zealand First Actor National voters. But that's also true for Labour, Māori Party, and would you believe, even Green Party voters. This polling shows that those who support this ideology are totally out of step with the majority of New Zealanders who recognise that the biological and physiological differences of sex matter. And despite attempts by some politicians and media to belittle this issue, as Audrey Young of the Herald did last week when she called it a rats and mice issue, it was the most opposed social issue leading up to the last election. But luckily, New Zealand First are onto it and reading the mood of the public well. And we finally had our first win in this fight against this new belief system. Earlier this week, Sports Minister Chris Bishop directed Raylan Castle at Sport New Zealand to review and update Their guidelines for inclusion of transgender people in community sport to ensure that they are in line with New Zealand First Coalition Agreement to ensure fair competition that isn't compromised by rules relating to gender. So can we please have a round of applause for the Right Honourable Winston Peters and his amazing team. Honestly, thank you. Why Sport New Zealand's guidelines are so problematic is that they allow, whoops, too fast now. I need someone to drive this for me. Is that they allow anyone to self-identify into any sporting category they choose and use the changing rooms they feel most comfortable with. No medical or surgical intervention is required, just their words. And the guidelines allow men to identify into sport just for the purposes of sport as well. They can live as men in all other facets of their life. And there are New Zealand men doing this in New Zealand. I often hear the argument that these guidelines aren't mandatory for sports to use, so what's the problem? However, I know from talking to our sporting leaders about this issue that while many would prefer to follow their international federation's guidelines, Sport New Zealand holds their funding levers, so they can feel compelled to adopt them. And I just want to dispel another couple of myths often pushed which do my head in. Community sport is not just social sport. It is all sport up until you represent your country. It includes regional representative and national age group competitions. It encompasses every pathway to elite level. How are females ever going to get to the elite level if there's barriers on the way? And if we want to look at who politicised this issue in sport, then look no further at our previous sports minister, Grant Robertson from Labour. It was he who directed Sport New Zealand to create guidelines that prioritised inclusion over all else. And then he called us raising fairness and safety concerns petty and small-minded. New Zealand First is just cleaning up the mess he left. And what a mess it is. Sport New Zealand's guidelines are totally focused on the feelings of a few while ignoring the feelings, fairness, safety and opportunities for half the population. Fairness and safety are only mentioned in regards to transgender participants, and if females raise concerns about their fairness and safety, they can be disciplined for discrimination, bullying and harassment. Females get no option to give consent and no consideration is given to their well-being or their safety. The guidelines are also in direct conflict with both sections 46 and 49 of the Human Rights Act. Sorry, I'm not doing very well with these slides. Whoop. Females should never be forced to share their sports or changing facilities with males, regardless of how they identify. But unfortunately, these guidelines are representative of many workplace policies throughout New Zealand now, which allow self-identification into women's toilets and changing facilities. A few weeks ago, myself and my co-spokeswoman, Candice Riley, and New Zealand Olympian Gary Anderson met with our Sports Minister, Chris Bishop, to highlight these problems with Sport New Zealand's guidelines, after first meeting with the Right Honourable Winston Peters. During the meeting, we provided some examples of the impacts on women and girls of allowing males into female sport. The Minister wrongly assumed when we began presenting these that these girls and women's stories were from overseas, and that males competing in female sport simply isn't an issue in New Zealand. And we hear that a lot. I'll go into that shortly. Even the sports editor at the New Zealand Herald decided to write an attack piece on us the following weekend, stating any examples of males participating in female sport were simply hypothetical. But none of these examples are hypothetical, and they are but the tip of an iceberg of males invading women's sport in New Zealand. Whether it's a 12-year-old boy identifying into a girls' cricket tournament and winning the Best Player award, not to mention sharing their dormitory accommodation without any consent given by the girls or their parents, or a male taking out all the end-of-year awards in a cycling club, another one winning over $8,000 worth of female prize money in downhill mountain biking. Unfortunately, when you include male advantage in female sport, you exclude females from opportunities in their own category, a category that was set up entirely to give them those opportunities. Females are either leaving their sport due to being injured by males or from fear of being injured, or due to encountering males in their changing rooms, as this 12-year-old swimmer did. Thank you. Someone's onto the slides for me. Or giving up out of the sheer unfairness of male advantage in their category. Nearly every sporting policy is similar to that of Sport New Zealand's. And it begins with the same threat. There is zero tolerance towards transphobia. Policies like this gaslight females into accepting a lack of fairness and safety, and it needs to stop. It's important to acknowledge that rebranding women's boundary as bigotry benefits only one group of people, and it's not women. Male spaces in sports are not negatively impacted, but women's are. And to be clear, our objection isn't about trans people in female spaces. We care that male people are being allowed into female spaces. Trans-identified women aren't a problem because they're women. The week after we presented to Sports Minister, a roller derby player called Monique Murphy found the courage to write a post on her Facebook page highlighting the concerns about males identifying into and injuring females in her sport, including herself. Monique had been hit by a male skater and causing a grade 2 AC joint sprain, which led to her withdrawal from the New Zealand team. In her post, Monique stated that the idea of diversity and inclusion is nice and kind, but we play sport with our bodies, not our feelings. When a man feels his identity isn't male, that doesn't change the fact he is. And given males have on average 52% more upper body strength, it means it's both unfair and unsafe for them to compete, especially in a contact sport. Now, I apologise for some of the language on these next slides, but this is what women experience when they dare to speak up for their rights. Is it any wonder hardly any ever do? Monique has now been suspended from her community roller derby teams, lost many of the friendships in her community, all for speaking truth. So we fully applaud her courage, but it wouldn't be needed if more of our sporting leaders actually found some themselves and did the right thing by their female athletes. We're regularly contacted by women telling us their stories or those of their girls, and without fail, the majority are far too scared to go public because of the bullying and harassment. Threats to their livelihoods is a big one, and the potential loss of friends. This bullying and threats to their jobs and livelihood is an important component of trans activism, as it serves to send a clear message to everyone daring to challenge their belief system. There is a high price to pay for your dissent. So many stay silent out of fear, others because they've been told this is the new gay rights movement, which many still believe it is, or that they have transitioned their children so they can't move on. I'd like to play this video from Helen Joyce, Irish journalist, author and director of advocacy at Sex Matters in the UK, as she identified this key problem we're now facing in fighting the many issues arising from this ideology. Are you able to put the sound up on that?
Not easily.
Oh, okay. Well, what Helen has discovered is that in a lot of organisations now, people have transitioned their children, and because when you transition your children, you have actually done something fundamentally to them that will impact them for the rest of their lives. Now, you cannot come to terms with the fact that you might have done something negative to their life, so you will fight to the bitter end to prove that what you did as a parent didn't impact them. And we have people that have trans children now in our media, in our government departments, everywhere. It's becoming really, really hard because they will pretty much take over that government department or that media organisation in terms of you cannot speak against this ideology because they are so invested in it now. And Helen talks about the harming of children. What she's talking about is the known harms of prescribing puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones on the health and development of young people. Routine use of these drugs have been halted in the UK, the Netherlands, France, Sweden and Finland, yet New Zealand are prescribing them at 7 times the rate of other countries. Sadly, we actively promote children embarking on this pathway through gender ideology taught in our schools. Some of you might find what I'm about to tell you confronting, but this is the reality of what we're doing. Puberty blockers stop children from going into and through puberty. Physically, it's bad for their bones, as they miss out on the calcium that will last them for the rest of their lives. It's clearly bad for their brain, as it stops the brain growth spike during puberty, but it also keeps their sex organs and their sex responses in a state of childhood. For instance, if they were destined to grow up gay, they would usually discover that during puberty. And remember, gay adults are usually the most gender non-conforming children there are. On top of that, most kids who take puberty blockers and go on to cross-sex hormones. If a child starts on puberty blockers at the age of 12 or 13 and then goes on to cross-sex hormones, they will continue to have child genitals for the rest of their lives. So the boys, a little boy penis. Their testes and ovaries will not mature, so they will not start producing sperm, and they will not be able to have an orgasm or even know what their sexuality is. Young women are being thrown into early menopause as testosterone accelerates the process, causing atrophy of the uterus and the vagina, which can lead to requiring a hysterectomy, with many suffering from postmenopausal problems like incontinence in their 20s. Yet this is what we're doing. We're literally neutering healthy children, many of whom would have grown up to be gay, others who are autistic and have always struggled to find their place in society, and promoting the ideology that pushes them down this path in our education system. This is why New Zealand's first policy on removing gender ideology from our schools is so damn important. The Ministry of Health has been reviewing their guidelines for years now, the results of which continue to be delayed. And while they no longer publicly state that the medication is safe and reversible, at the same time, they endorse the guidelines of PATHA, who are part of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which says they are considered to be fully reversible. And these nutters include eunuchs under the transgender umbrella now. They are assisting our Ministry of Health with their review, like our medical system has been utterly corrupted. Again, is it fair stopping the Ministry of Health from knowingly harming kids and the Minister responsible, Matt Ducey, from stopping this? Or will one day we discover that there were parents with trans kids involved in this review, so they couldn't do anything else? We're told the sex versus gender debate is toxic and it causes harm, and that's true. It's toxic and harmful to women and children. Sex-based rights matter. Safety matters. Truth matters, biological reality matters. New Zealand's children matter. And I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful New Zealand First thinks so too. At Save Women's Sport, we've done what we can to support your policy in sport. Now we need you to ensure Sport New Zealand delivers on the commitment the government made to New Zealanders. Why is sport so important? Because once society acknowledges that trans women are not women for the purposes of sport, then we finally acknowledge the truth, which is they are not women at all, and the whole ideology crumbles. But this is why trans activists will fight so hard to ensure self-identification remains in the guidelines, and it's why we need to keep fighting to ensure it doesn't. Thank you.